right, so again, thank you all for joining us here tonight. Tonight's presentation is Explore Massachusetts State Parks with the Mass DCR. Tonight, we're joined by Barbara Bowles of the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, also known as Mass DCR, as she discusses all that there is to do with Massachusetts state parks. And some of my facts and figures might be slightly outdated, so I preface that. With 460,000 acres of land and 440 parks and properties, Massachusetts has one of the largest state park systems in the country. Barbara will give a multimedia presentation highlighting many of these parks across the Commonwealth, with particular attention paid to some of the parks in the greater Tewksbury area. State parks have so much to offer, from swimming, camping, hiking, walking, bike riding, fishing, canoeing, horseback riding, sailing, windsurfing, rock climbing, skiing, golfing, and many other outdoor activities. And parks also provide opportunities for picnics, outdoor performances, areas to rent for company or family gatherings, historic sites, skating rinks, playgrounds, athletic fields, and much, much more. So come discover things you never knew about your state parks. So all 60 of us or so, and the hundreds that will be watching on demand, let's give a big round of applause to Barbara for joining us here tonight. And Barbara, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Robert. That's awesome. That's really awesome. And I'm just pretending I'm hearing like this huge round of applause. So welcome, everyone. My name is Barbara Bowles. I am the Regional Interpretive Coordinator for the North Region of Massachusetts State Parks. And there are 3 other people in the state that share my duties in the other regions of the parks. Interpretation is a very slippery fish, but we are the people who do the programs and public communication and visitor services for the Massachusetts State Parks. I was very pleased to hear what Robert had to say about the acreage and everything and the number of parks, because we're never quite sure. It really depends on what it is that you're talking about. It has one of the largest state park systems. I believe that that is as a percentage of size. The statistic that I like the most, actually, is that we manage 11% of this state acreage, which is a lot. And Robert was really good about going through all the different things that we manage, because it's changed over the years. And just a little bit about me. I've worked in parks and biology and fish and wildlife management all of my working career, and I've worked outside all of my life. And I believe that we really need a connection to our natural world as human beings to really develop fully as human beings. So tonight, you know, the COVID response has been a little bit, we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of state parks and getting out there and everything, but I have legitimately worn my uniform for you all tonight, and I welcome the questions that you have a little bit later on. I do want to make a plug for Jim Legacy next week. He's a great, great guy. I've known him for 20 years. He's done the Harold Parker Fishing Festival for us, which this year would have been, I believe it would have been the 36th annual fishing festival at Harold Parker State Forest at Sutton Pond. And he's a great, great guy, and he'll do a wonderful presentation. So be sure not to miss that. So this is our basic sort of Mass DCR, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, as you can see, PowerPoint. And it talks about borrowing a Massachusetts Park Pass at a participating library near you. So when I went to prepare for this presentation, I called my local library to make sure that the passes were still available. And I live in Gloucester. So it's a Sawyer Free Library in Gloucester. And they said, no, actually, we do not have a current pass. They have a 2019 pass, but typically, I mean, this whole thing, everything's been disrupted by COVID. So typically we do have a library pass in all the participating libraries. So you can actually go and check it out to visit our libraries for free. So that's our Use Nature as Your Library program. I want to do this presentation tonight in 2 parts, kind of. One is to just show you the myriad different kinds of properties that we manage and talk a little bit about the history of DCR and what it used to be and what it is now. And then I would like to talk a little bit more intimately about what's in sort of your native area in Tewksbury, so you are aware of the parks that exist around you. So this first screen is, of course, a place that we all probably know about, Walden Pond State Reservation, right down the road in Concord. It was the birth or the home of Henry David Thoreau for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days in the mid-1800s, exactly 1845 to 1847. And he went there to live simply and to write in his journal and to get over the death of his brother John. It's a fabulous place. So this particular spot within our park system has a lot of literary meaning to it, as do some of our other parks. We also manage, believe it or not, the Hatch Shell and the whole Esplanade in Boston. A lot of the other, I'm forgetting that, the roads within, like Jamaica Way, the Esplanade, Storrow Drive. These are all managed by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Years ago, until about 10 years ago, places like this, the Esplanade, was managed by the Metropolitan District Commission, or the MDC. And those parks outside of 128, essentially, sort of generally, were managed by the Department of Environmental Management. But then we merged about 10 years ago to form the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and that sort of combined all the parks that were known sort of across to the Berkshires, and also includes all those urban parks within the metropolitan area. We manage an awful lot of beaches like Nahant, Reservation, also Lynn Shores, Revere, Reservation, Winthrop, Constitution Beach, Horseneck Beach, Gusset Beach, Salisbury Beach. So DCR manages many of the public, Wollaston Beach, many of the public beaches within our shorelines. We also have a farm, Great Brook Farm State Park in Carlisle, that many of you may be aware of. It's not too far from Tewksbury. This was historically a gentleman farmer named Farnham Smith, bought all the land that eventually made this farm. And he was a gentleman farmer, and he did sort of, breeding in dairy cows and that kind of thing. We now have our resident farmer, Mark and Tamma Duffy, who have been there for a very long time, I think about 30 years. And while we keep the cultural landscape, as you can see with the upright silos and everything, we're also into technological advances in dairy farming. So there is a robotic milking machine called a voluntary milking system at Great Brook Farm State Park. So they have over 100 cows that are being milked currently by a robot. One of the first robotic milking machine in Massachusetts, one of the first in the United States. But we maintain the cultural landscape for historic value. This is the only dairy farm, the only active dairy farm housed within a state park in the United States. We also have many, many, many forests. This is Mohawk State Forest in Charlemont, which is obviously out the Mohawk Trail. Many, many other state forests across the state: Otter River State Forest, Harold Parker State Forest, which is probably the closest state park to you. Myles Standish State Forest. We'll talk about all this a little bit later. And these state forests came about in the early 1900s when, as you are probably aware, much of Massachusetts was deforested. And it was deforested to clear land for agriculture and also to build ships and masts and houses and all of that. And Harold Parker himself was a very instrumental, a very instrumental individual in developing our state forest system, because he decided, along with a couple of friends of his, that we had to purchase land on which to grow trees. At that point in time, around the turn of the century, there were very, very few trees in the Commonwealth. It was at least 85% deforested. And so Harold Parker, saw the trend of what was happening, that we were having to import all of this wood from the south, from overseas, and they decided that they needed to purchase this land, which they purchased at less than $5 an acre to grow trees. And so the State Forest Division of DCR is a very, very important part of our history. We have quarries. Halibut Point State Park in Rockport, Massachusetts, right on my island here. And this was instrumental in the Rockport Granite Company, which was used, the granite from this particular quarry was used to build the breakwater, sandy bay breakwater. But much of the granite industry tells the story of the beautiful buildings that are built within New England. And we are very, very lucky to retain this particular piece of property on the edge of the island. It also had an instrumental role in World War II and the Cold War and radar, the development of radar. This is Purgatory Chasm. If you have never heard of this park, you really need to go and see it. It is a big gash in the land that is glacially formed. It has a huge history of stories about the macabre and all of this. And it's just south of Worcester on Route 146. And then there are spots like Castle Island in South Boston. These are obviously military, buildings and forts that were built for the Revolutionary War, for, used during a lot of the military operations that were done on the East Coast in the United States. Beautiful views. And then there's Revere Beach Reservation. As you may or may not be aware, Revere Beach was the very, very first public beach in our country and hosts the annual Sand Festival, Sand Sculpting Festival, which, if you have not seen it, is fantastic. And tells the story of, they had a narrow gauge railroad there, and that made it possible for the regular public to access the beach. And it was a vision of a man named Charles Elliott, who we'll talk about a little bit later on. But Revere Beach had the whole history of swimming costumes that you had to rent, those woolen full suit swimming costumes, and has become one of the premier beaches in the Boston area. In very, very recent years, I would say 4 or 5 years ago, it's become a really important nesting spot for piping plovers. And we are involved in the conservation of that particular bird, who has come back from the brink of endangerment to now being a threatened species, and they're protected federally on Revere Beach and other beaches. You may or may not be aware that out in Boston Harbor, we have a whole bunch of islands called the Boston Harbor Islands, or BHI, as we tend to refer to them as. And a lot of them have been used in the past for hospitals and for prisoners, you know, to keep them sequestered out there in Boston Harbor. They have boats that run out from Hingham and from Long Wharf in Boston. And when you are out there, you could swear that you're just miles and miles away and there's Boston right on the skyline, particularly effective at night. And then there are parks like these former mill sites, Moore State Park in Paxton, which is sort of southwest of Worcester. This particular park, I love this park. It's very, very well cared for. It has the largest natural stand of rhododendrons in New England. Both Moore State Park in Paxton and Maudsley State Park in Newburyport have a fantastic bloom, a cycling bloom of rhododendrons and azaleas that starts sometime in early May and goes sort of into June. And that is just a fantastic thing to see. It's just jaw-dropping that we have these kind of, you know, former estates, former mills that were landscaped so beautifully at one point in time. Natural Bridge State Park is out in North Adams. This is a marble quarry. And it's also very affected by the natural river that runs through it and eroded down through the marble, but they actively quarried it at one time. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful spot. And of course, there's Blue Hills State Reservation. And this is the WGBH, the radio station, and the TV station, which is named after Great Blue Hill, where they have their big tower. This is one of our largest reservations, especially near Boston, within, you know, a very crow's fly of Boston, and many, many miles of trails right within, you know, a short distance from the city. And Blue Hills was a place that was managed by the Metropolitan District Commission before we became DCR. We also manage a lot of rail trails, which is really become, rail trails have really, really become a very popular form of recreation for a lot of people. Not only for walking and biking, but also for strollers and people with mobility limitations, which is an important audience in our state parks that we really try to focus on so that people with mobility limitations can actually get out into the outdoors and enjoy recreation. The Ashuwillticook Trail happens to be in Lanesborough, Cheshire, and Adams, but we do have the Norwalk Rail Trail, there's the Cape Cod Rail Trail, all on our website. They're very easy to find. Myles Standish State Forests in Plymouth and Carver is one of our larger state forests that also has some private inholdings, cottages on some lakes. This was another one of our original state forests. Revere Beach, once again, this was originally a Metropolitan District Commission managed facility. The Middlesex Fells, this was one of our very, very first properties that was preserved and managed within the Metropolitan District Commission and another agency even prior to that. In these 5 cities, if you drive south on 93 toward Boston, once you pass 128, Route 128 over the top, hello, Laura Dooley, how are you? I just saw you come in from the waiting room. It is the property as you pass the zoo exit on exit 35. It's that treed and lake property on either side of Route 93. Quite a big piece of property that a lot of people don't even realize is a state park because it lies within so many urban areas. But one of our founding fathers, Charles Eliot, was so focused on preserving some of this wild rocky land so that it wouldn't be developed in the late 1800s. So it would be preserved for the respite and relaxation of the residents of the Commonwealth. We are so fortunate to have people like Charles Eliot who had the foresight to preserve this land. There was a lot of urbanization and a lot of urban squalor going on at that time in the late 1800s. And he was just determined to make sure that it wouldn't all be eaten up by the Industrial Revolution. And that's what we enjoy today in the Middlesex Fells State Reservation. We also manage a lot of swimming pools. We manage swimming pools in Lowell and Lawrence. We manage several in Boston. There's one not too far from the Fells in Stoneham. So Fall River has a swimming pool, lots of Springfield, Worcester, a lot of city swimming pools. And ballparks, believe it or not. We manage ballparks mostly within the city of Boston. Ponkapog Golf Course in the Blue Hills is managed also by the DCR. So we have a lot of irons in the fire in terms of those kinds of properties that we are tasked with managing. This is one of my favorite parks, actually, Breakheart Reservation in Saugus. I did a chronicle episode for them about Route 1 and the development, or what is along Route 1 and what is now preserved along Route 1. This is a fantastic visitor center that exists in Breakheart Reservation. And this is a stone's throw from Route 1, right in the middle of Saugus, but you would never, ever know that you were not in some wilderness. And this is one of these properties that began as a hunting reserve. 3 guys with a bunch of money bought up this property and developed, you know, a lodge and all of that. And they had it for their private reserve. And then along the way, we had the foresight to acquire that land and make sure that it was available for people. There are 2 loops of paved roads that go through Breakheart, and it's one of the best places for walking, particularly with a stroller or bicycle, or if you have mobility issues. We also do watershed protection, both Wachusett Reservoir and the Quabbin, which is Boston water supply. All of us have drunk water out of the Quabbin Reservoir. This is another type of property that is managed by the DCR. And it is very pristine land. Dogs are not allowed. There's not a whole lot of activity other than passive recreation that can take place within the watersheds. They protect the water very, very carefully. So we're pretty lucky to have the Quabbin as our water supply. And then, of course, there are places like Mount Greylock, which is the tallest mountain in Massachusetts. This is Bascom Lodge. This was a building built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC, in the 30s. If you have never gone to stay at Bascom Lodge, you really have to do yourself a favor and book a room. Very easy to get a room in later September, October. My husband and I usually go out like a Monday, Tuesday night, so we don't have to book too far in advance. Beautiful log lodge with a big fireplace overlooking the mountain, and it's right on the top of Mount Greylock. So a lot of our programming is driven by certain things that have taken place, you know, in American history when kids were just watching so much TV, and especially now during COVID, it's really kind of tragic that we're all looking at a screen still, right? We're all looking at a screen. And the fact that there was a real problem with obesity and diabetes and all of this. So studies were done, of course, on especially children and the fact that they should be playing outside. So there was a man named Richard Louv. This is a fantastic book called Last Child in the Woods that talks about from the time that I was maybe a child, and I was born in 1960, and we were always outside playing and running around and going to the reservoir and catching tadpoles and all of that. And our radius of freedom wandering from home got smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point that kids often now don't even go outside. And the last statistic I read was 7 minutes is what a child spends outside on a daily basis. So we kind of jumped on that bandwagon, and there was a national movement. This goes back a few years to like 2013. There was a children and nature plan for action put into place to try and get kids more into nature and outside, because we all know nature is so fascinating and so provocative that once you start someone, you know, in that vein, they will most likely continue. So one of the programs that we use to kind of hook very small children, we're talking about pre-K through elementary school, is called Kidleidoscope, and it's a 3-part program that takes place outside, ideally, even if it's raining, and has a story, craft, and an activity, an outdoor activity, to kind of acquaint children with the properties of state parks around them and get them used to feeling sort of at home, you know, in nature. So that is one program that we do. We also, along with Mass Wildlife Angler Education Program and Jim Legacy, who will be speaking next week, we teach kids to fish. And the interesting part to me is, like, when I was a child, I don't ever remember learning how to fish. I don't ever remember somebody teaching me how to cast and reel and, you know, hold the button in and release it to cast the rod. But I find that I have to teach the parents how to fish. So we're missing a couple of generations of people who are familiar with, you know, outdoor programs like fishing. And Jim's going to be talking more about that next week. This is something that we still have up and running, is our suggested hikes that are linked to all of the singular web pages on our website for suggested hikes for people of different, you know, abilities and levels. These are downloadable on the DCR web pages, and I can give you a little bit of information. The thing that we don't want is for people to go into parks and get lost, because that's pretty easy to do. And a lot of people are pretty, I've been lost a lot. So, I mean, but I don't care, because it doesn't make me nervous. I get lost and then I find where I'm going. But a lot of people feel pretty uncomfortable when they get turned around in the woods. So part of what we want to get across to people is that we want them to know, to become familiar with being in the woods. Some of the larger programs that we do include maple sugaring programs. And we do those maple sugaring programs at these particular state parks Now with COVID, we are no longer, well, yet, we are not doing these programs as of yet, but I have no doubt that in the future we will go back to them. And what we do is we demonstrate how to tap a tree, how to, boil the sap, and all of how to cut the wood and make the fire, all of that kind of stuff. So there are thousands of people every year that come to our maple sugaring programs. We often journal with little kids so that they learn how to record their thoughts about nature and in words or pictures. Another initiative that we have had every year for a very long time of our first day hikes, and on January 1st, obviously. And this started in the Blue Hills. I would think about 30 years ago, it started in the Blue Hills, and now these first day hikes take place not only all over the Commonwealth in many of our state parks, but across the entire country in all 50 states. We were able to spread it across the country. The last 3 years, I want to say, we've done a first day hike at Harold Parker State Forest right in your backyard. So maybe one day we'll be able to return and hike on January 1st. We also have a passport program. The boxes look very much like this to the left with a little chickadee on the cover, and they have stamps with these kind of images on them: Pilgrim Memorial, Charles River, Connecticut River Greenway, throughout our state parks. And Park Serve Day. This is typically done the last week of April, where we will ask people to come out, sort of in celebration of Earth Day, but volunteers to come out and help us with some sort of an initiative, planting trees or helping build trails, or somebody picking up trash or planting something. And that's a real nice way to volunteer to help your state parks. We also have a universal access program. This is so important for people of all abilities with handicap access in kayaks and bicycles and skiing. And there are also many accessible trails throughout our park system. So in a typical year, and obviously this is not a typical year, as we all know, our interpretive programming takes place with about all these things too: junior ranger programs with kids, for kids from 8 to 13, first day hikes and hiking clubs, maple sugaring, nature walks, and big events like Boston July 4th, that is managed by the DCR, movies in the parks, Down on the Farm, which is a farm celebration at Great Brook Farm State Park, and many other things. So there are ways to get involved with Mass State Parks. You can attend a program or event. Again, we're not at this point in time doing programs. That many of the parks have friends groups. I know the Harold Parker has a very active friends group, and they're really a great bunch of people, always doing sort of, flagging new trails and doing things like that. And you can donate to the Conservation Trust, which money goes back into that particular park. So this is basically our north region, and Tewksbury is somewhere like right up here, somewhere right on 495. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these, parks that are in your area. I'm sure you all have heard of Salisbury Beach State Reservation. This is one of our busiest beaches, and also has a campground with over 400 camping spots. Halibut Point State Park in Rockport Incidentally, we just did a refurbish on our visitor center up there, which was a World War II military building initially, never meant to be a permanent building that was built only as a temporary building, but we put a lot of money into it, and we have new exhibits and displays going in there very soon that will tell the story of not only the quarrying industry, but also the military involvement that took place at Halibut Point. Bradley Palmer State Park in Topsfield, Ipswich, has a splash pad and wading pool. It was the former estate of Bradley Webster Palmer, who was a lawyer in Boston, and a very, very wealthy man who bought thousands of acres of land and ended up donating all of them to the Commonwealth for the health and welfare of its citizens. Maudsley State Park in Newburyport, you probably all know about this park as well. It's right on the Merrimack River, beautiful views. It's the other state park that has a terrific rhododendron and azalea bloom, as well as the mountain laurel bloom. And it was the former estate of the Mosley family, who lived there only one generation. Walden Pond State Reservation in Concord, which was the home of Henry David Thoreau for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. We do have a new visitor center, which is LEED certified at that facility since about 2016. Very beautiful building. Right now it's closed for the COVID. The farm in Carlisle, they do have winter skiing. You see in this winter photograph with the silo on it, there are some skiers. There's a ski concession, Great Brook Ski Concession, that lives at that particular park. And you can get a season pass. The best deal going is our senior parks pass that you can get at this particular link. Now, I can always send this to Robert, and then he can provide you with the particulars. If you go on right after the https:// this www.mass.gov/DCR, which is pretty easy to remember. You can navigate your way around and find out how to get an annual pass. We used to sell them at all the state parks. During COVID, everything has gone online. And if you can buy you can get a receipt for a state parks pass at one of our pay and display machines, but then you will have to mail it in for the hang tag. And if you want to make a camping reservation, you have to go online to reserveamerica.com or call this particular number that I can provide Robert with, so you don't have to remember it. So just some thoughts from Richard Louvre about future stewards of our wildlands. During the COVID times, if you go on www.mass.gov, there is a link for COVID update right at that address. One of the most valuable things I think that we have provided within my career time at Mass State Parks has been that we kept all of our parks open during this pandemic. And that was so very crucial for people to have some place to go. It also was very overwhelming for the stuff that was left in the parks. We had a terrible trash situation. We had some situations with people parking in the wrong places or over parking and having to tow cars and things like that. So we would ask, if you want to go, that you look at the updates, make sure that you know before you go what's open, what may have limited parking, And we certainly want you to come out to the state park so that you can also, you know, get away from your TV screen and get outside and enjoy, you know, the best season that we have in New England, which is coming right now. So, and what we're asking for is just to stay within small groups, 10 or fewer, social distancing, healthy personnel hygiene, non-contact recreational activities. We're all pretty much passive recreation right now. Biking, hiking, walking. We asked if large gatherings begin, that you leave the area and stay home if you're ill. Our online pass purchases for Mass residents are $60 a year, which ends up being, I think somebody told me one time, 13 cents a day, which is not bad considering that you can go to Salisbury Beach as many times as you want, or Revere Beach within the year. We have doubled our non-Massachusetts residence fee, which has been problematic, obviously, for some people. I think this is kind of an attempt to limit, you know, some visitation to our state parks, and a second car sticker that you can obtain for $25. But our best deal going for those 65 years old and older is $10 for life. It used to be free, but it's still a pretty good deal. And we do sell a lot of senior passes. So that's about all I have right now. I want to thank you so much for joining me for this presentation. And I hope that you will be able to get out into some of our parks and see some of the beautiful land that the Commonwealth enjoys and manages. Thank you.
Barbara, wonderful job. So folks, we're going to take about 10 minutes of questions for Barbara. If you have a question or comment and haven't already, please get it into the chat, and we will wrap by 8 o'clock so Barbara can watch the primary election results.
No, thank you.
So first up, I'm going to go in reverse order here. Laurel wants to know, do you have any information on volunteer opportunities with the DCR?
We do take volunteers. But we do have a volunteer policy. So that will be, you know, it's just administrative paperwork kinds of things. You would be best to either contact the Boston office or contact whatever park you would be interested in volunteering for.
Great.
If you get stuck or by chance you don't hear from someone, you can always contact me. So, and Robert has my contact information.
Sure, I will include the contact information in the email tomorrow morning. Let's see here. Dee wants to know, are any of the trees or lumber from our state forests sold?
We just happen to have a forester on this presentation named Laura Dooley. I can see you right now. Maybe you want to talk about that. We do, Laura, you would be the best one to talk about that, actually.
There are a few forests in Massachusetts, mostly the middle of the state and west, that we harvest timber, but the new designations in the northeast section are, how can I say it? I guess they're like kind of pristine areas, and there will, whatever, we don't cut timber in like Bradley Palmer or Harold Parker or places like that. There's a designation, I forget what it's called, but in Worcester County and west, yes, on some of the large tracts, we do cut the timber and harvest frequently.
All right, thank you, Lori. Thanks for being on the call.
Laura.
Laura, sorry.
No problem.
Candace just noted that last night on Chronicle, they spotlighted the Purgatory Chasm, or Chasm.
Nice.
John had a specific question about Halibut Point. He was wondering if swimming and kayaking were allowed.
No. Well, you can go into the water off of Halibut Point. It is rocky coast. I wouldn't do it. Every year we get someone who's injured because of the waves, or they slip on the rocks or whatever, but there is no swimming allowed in the quarry or kayaking boats in the quarry. No. You can, at Harold Parker State Forest, there are 11 ponds there, and you can take kayaks into the ponds at Harold Parker State Forest. Field Pond is a good one. That's right by the State Police Barracks off of 125. That entrance into Harold Parker off of 125, right past the State Police Barracks. Lots of pull-offs there that you can, park a car and launch a canoe or a kayak.
Deanne, I appreciate your long name tonight here. Deanne wants to know, what number can you call to see if a state park is open or not? Ashland, for example, is not always open.
Right. It is really hard right at this point in time because no one is currently working in our Boston office. Our main number is 617-626-1250, 1250. They are monitoring those lines, and someone should get back to you to answer that kind of a question, but it may take a little while. Ashland, yeah, that's one of those parks that they can close, so they do when we're short-staffed. Yeah.
Barbara had a question about a trail in Tewksbury. I'm 99% sure it's a local trail that has nothing to do with the Mass DCR, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The trail on Whipple Street, I think it's called Long Pond. Is that managed by the state or locally? It's supposed to be a hiking trail with painted rocks on the trail, but we went over there this weekend and we could not find the trail anywhere. Out of luck, Barbara?
It's not
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe Laura knows.
Yeah, it's not ours.
Not ours, yeah.
Yeah, it's not ours. We don't have a park in Tewksbury.
Yeah, didn't think so. Laura wants to know, does Barbara recommend certain parks for bird watching?
Oh, yeah. It depends on what kind of bird watching you want to do. Right now, Halibut Point State Park in Rockport is absolutely fabulous for migratory seabirds. You can stand out there on the overlook and see flocks and flocks of scoters and loons and cormorants and all different kinds of shorebirds going by. Halibut Point is a good bird watching park. In the winter, it is one of the most reliable places to go and see harlequin ducks, again, seabirds, winter seabirds, gannets, things like that. I can recommend any park in the summer that has sort of a forest water connect, any river, that kind of thing, where you would get that edge effect that might attract species of birds. Is it, whoever asked that question, if you wanted, what kinds of birds are you looking for? That would help.
Let us know in the chat, and we'll move on for now. Laura just pointed out earlier that, and I know we're talking about state parks, obviously, but the national parks have a senior lifetime pass for $80. So she wanted to point that out. John, so as you mentioned, Barbara, the senior lifetime pass for the Mass DCR, the state parks, is $10. John also mentioned that he thinks the age cutoff is 62, not 65.
I could be wrong about that. Yeah, I bet it is 62. Thank you.
Yep. Laura has another question. Can Barbara recommend how a young, newly college graduated person gets into her field with a BS in biology?
Well, very soon. We don't know about our winter rosters yet. That's sort of starting to happen. The jobs will be posted on Mass Careers. If you go out and find Mass Careers, after we do our recall in January and February, then they will start posting seasonal positions in Mass Careers. And we do hiring in all kinds of divisions from, you know, my division, interpretive services, which is education, to the labor force and supervisors and operations, you know, kind of things. So I would just say watch Mass Careers.
Great. A few more questions, folks, and then we'll wrap up at 8. John, I will include any links in the presentation in tomorrow's email. Okay, that addresses that. Jill wants to know, what was the location you mentioned that was beautiful regarding quarries? Was that
well, I mentioned a couple of spots for quarries. One was Halibut Point State Park in Rockport.
Right.
The other quarry location that I mentioned was Natural Bridge State Park in North Adams. That's the marble quarry. It's a very, very small state park, but it's really gorgeous. That might have been the one that I had mentioned. It's way, way out there. Takes 3 hours from here to get there. So
Julie wants to, a lot of questions and comments about the senior pass, Barbara. Julie wants to know where to get the senior pass.
You can go online at that link that I gave you. You can also go to a state park with a pay and display machine. Harold Parker has several. I couldn't sort of explain to you right now how you would find them. And you can purchase a senior pass through the machine there. What you get is a receipt. And then you have to, you used to be able to walk right into park headquarters and exchange it for a hang tag, right? But now since the COVID, we're not doing anything face-to-face, and so you have to mail it in and they will mail you back a hang tag. But you can also go online. I'm pretty sure that you can purchase them online. And what you would have to provide is a scan or a photograph of your driver's license or something.
Great. So I think we've pretty much addressed comments and questions. A lot of thank yous, Barbara, in the chat. So Barbara, did you have any last words you wanted to impart on the group?
Yeah, just everybody be safe and go outside. It's very good for us right now. We're all feeling pretty, you know, pent up, and it's very healing to be outside in nature and feel the wind on your face and, you know, try and just relax in all of this craziness that's going on right now. So we welcome you to our state parks. We just want people to be responsible, be good stewards, act responsibly, and you know, carry in, carry out. We've had a terrible, terrible trash problem since the COVID thing, and we're really trying very hard to, you know, provide a good experience for everybody that comes.
Great, understood. Great. Well, thank you so much, Barbara, for giving us so much of your time.
Thank you very much.
Huge turnout. I think we had around 65 accounts logged in. That's the highest point. So that's a great turnout for us. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Look for that email tomorrow morning with the survey and with the recording. Feel free to share the recording with anyone who you might think would benefit or be interested in such a talk. And please join us next week for Jim, next Tuesday, 7 o'clock. Learn about all the wonderful places.
He's good. He's good. You'll enjoy him.
Not as good as Barbara, but he's pretty good. So,
no, not as good as I am. Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Want to thank you.
Have a good night.
Yep. And
Okay.
I'm
Bye.
gonna
Thanks, Barbara.
Have a good one, guys. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.